Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Stacy Whitman. I'm the publisher of 2 books, and today we're going to be talking about Indian No More, which is a book by Charlene Willing McManis with Traci Sorell, who is the co-author. So today we are going to be talking about all sorts of things related to the book. But first, let me introduce the panel, and then we're going to be talking about Charlene. So I am Stacy Whitman, and I'm the publisher of 2 books, which is the middle grade and YA imprint of Lee and Low Books, which is a series this is our Tea Time Chat series that we're doing every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're talking about picture books, middle grade books, YA books for a while now. So this is our second one, and let me introduce Traci Sorell, who is our co-author. Traci, can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I am Traci Sorell, and I am coming to you live from the Cherokee Nation within now what is northeastern Oklahoma, and I'm looking forward to the chat today.
And Elise Elise McMullen-Ciotti is what I'm trying to say, is the editor on the book. Elise, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Elise McMullen-Ciotti, and I'm the editor, and I'm coming to you live, a Cherokee woman coming to you live from Lenape country in Manhattan. Glad to be here.
Thanks, everyone. So today is a special day. We're remembering Charlene because 2 years ago today she passed away. Traci, can you? I'm actually going to pull up a picture of her. Can you talk about our friend as I pull up her picture?
I'd be happy to. Charlene and I met in 2016 at the Quayle Journal's Color of Children's Literature Conference. There were 7 Native writers there that day, and Charlene has, as you can see on the photo, the most gorgeous smile. She just radiates joy and light, and it's hard to talk about her in the past tense because in terms of, her physical presence here, because she is very much still with me. And so when she got sick and asked me to help take the editorial letter and finish the changes, the revisions needed to get the book ready for publication, it was very difficult to think that, this bright light, this person that you see on the screen would no longer be with us. And as you mentioned, we're celebrating her today. This is the 2nd anniversary of her leaving us. And I just am so ecstatic about the journey this book has taken, and what an important part of the legacy, of her legacy that it is. And I'm just grateful that we're all here today to celebrate her and to celebrate this book.
So I'm going to go back in time a little bit and talk about how I found the book. Charlene had actually submitted it. I don't remember the exact timing. I believe that she submitted it to the New Visions Award, which is a writing contest that we do every year for new writers of color and Indigenous writers who've never been published before. And I also met her at the Quayle conference, at the same Quayle that you met her at. And she didn't win the award that year, but I saw her promise in this manuscript, and I knew that it had potential. And so I actually sent it to Elise, who reads for us and gives us her expertise on and particularly on Native issues. Elise, can you give us a sense of what you saw in the book when you first read it?
I think the very first thing after receiving it was I felt seen. Like as a child, like I felt like I was kind of going back in time when I was a kid and feeling like my childhood, even though it was, even though, my childhood was in the 70s and hers was in the 50s, all the years have been made up for in a way that we're being seen as Native people. And I remember just crying through it and writing things in the margins about how true this book was, and then calling my whole family to say, you won't believe what I just read. And all of my reporting back to Stacy, I just remember thinking, this has to happen. This really, really must happen, so that other Indigenous kids could have that same experience, to feel seen and made real.
It's just such a beautiful book, and so funny and poignant at the same time. Isn't that? Yeah. I found that in every Native author that I've edited, that's something that is very important in storytellings across nations. Is that something that you found as well?
Me, I think
both of you.
But I think everyone has their own voice. Indigenous storytelling tends to be a little circular, and we like to engage the listener in our stories, and we have a particular kind of humor in a lot of our nations that I felt that that people from different Native nations would actually see and relate to in Charlene's work. How about you, Traci?
Yeah, I mean, from the minute I started reading the book, I thought, oh my gosh, like this is me as a child, with some of these commentaries like that Regina would give. And I just love the relationships with her cousins and family, and how, even though their family, relocates, she has this similar kind of familial way that she is with the neighborhood kids, and that her family is. I loved, their relations and just the way that they interact, because that's how, whether, I grew up here in northeastern Oklahoma within my tribe, and so I had all of my extended family around me, but I've since lived and worked and studied in lots of different parts of Indian country. And, I felt like, even though, my tribe didn't go through the termination policy in the 50s, or relocation, my family didn't participate in that. I felt like there were so many things that, regardless of your background, you would connect to, and that are poignant and that are funny, and that's how we, survive. That's how we've made it this far. At the same time, for kids who aren't Native and don't have much knowledge at all, I feel like it's just a wonderful segue into history that they don't know, but then also, again, our culture, familial relations, just the way that Native people can walk in the world. So I loved it from the beginning, and it was such a fast read, but man, it was just gripping. So
Traci, I think you did such an amazing job with, it was still Charlene and it was you, and I felt like reading the edits, I was just like, it's Charlene and it's Traci and it's Charlene, and it was just I thought you were masterful at it.
I appreciate
preserving
that.
Charlene's voice, yes.
Margarita Engel had said something about that, because she had mentored Charlene through the We Need Diverse Books mentorship, and I'm grateful that Charlene kept going at her craft and got this novel done. And worked with Margarita, but I feel like that was one of the highest compliments. Was Margarita was like, I've seen this in earlier iterations, and I just want to thank you for keeping her voice, but I know also what you've done to get the novel where it is for publication. So that was really, like I say, important, because it's such a strong voice, not just Regina's, but all the characters. And so you want to have that be seamless, and that's what we all enjoyed about it.
Before we get a little bit more into process, can we let everybody know what the book is about? So in case they haven't had a chance to read it. Before you do that, actually, I just want to let everyone know, you can add questions in the chat and we'll take those at the end. Traci, do you want to give us a quick summary of the book?
Sure. So the book finds Regina and her family living on the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Reservation in what is now Northwest Oregon. And the federal government in the 1950s really ramped up a termination policy. Over 100 tribes were impacted, and the federal government basically said to these Native nations, we're no longer going to treat you on a government-to-government basis where we negotiate things and talk about our relations, et cetera, and how things are going to be done. You no longer exist for us. And therefore, your land is no longer going to be held by you. So if your individual citizens can buy their land outright, great. The prices were marked up. Many families couldn't afford to do that. And so what essentially happened is, for many of these reservation communities, people were forced to leave because they couldn't stay. And that's what happens to Regina in the story. That's actually what happened to Charlene's family in real life. The book is not autobiographical, but it is informed by Charlene's childhood, but she also interviewed other Grand Ronde citizens. And then it is historical fiction. So there's just other parts that are added in that aren't part of her experience. Charlene was a child living in the 60s when she's younger, going to elementary school. So she's a little older. She's younger than Regina in the book. But, we made sure that, like I say, in terms of termination and the way that played out with the tribe, that is true to the facts and the dates that the tribe experienced. And the other part of termination is relocation. So for these people who are now displaced, they've got to go somewhere. And the federal government had a relocation program. In the story, Regina and her family, like Charlene and her family and many other people from Grand Ronde and other tribes across the country, were relocated to cities by the federal government with the promise of education and classes and jobs. And they often found themselves in low income and working class neighborhoods, in living conditions and in places they had, of course, had never been, being, around family and in a familiar environment. And so her family got on the train and goes to Los Angeles in the story. So we start off on the reservation and then we go to Los Angeles, and what that's like when you've come from a place where everyone knows you to a place where no one does. And the Indian that they know is on the TV or in the movies. And so that's the whole grappling of, am I Indian anymore? Or who am I, and how she has to figure that out.
And when it comes to you being the co-author doing these revisions when Charlene couldn't, I'm going to share my screen again because we have some pictures. You made a few trips. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yes. So here's a picture. You're looking at the elementary school that Regina talks about in the book. And this is actually the elementary school that Charlene went to. And it's the 3-story red brick building in the lower right corner there. And behind it looks like kind of just dirt. But by the time Charlene's there, this is in Los Angeles, and it's a cement filled. And that's what Charlene talks about in the book. And that's where she went to elementary school. And this is another picture of the school that later had a building added to it. You can see the cement behind there. And then if you'll look, all of those houses back around there are super close together. And it's quite a bit difference from where she lived, on the reservation. In the top center is her house on 58th Place. The bottom center is Charlene is second from the left, and her sister's on the right. These are 2 neighborhood children that were their good friends. And then this is Charlene with one of her teachers at that elementary school. So, like I say, very different from her life in Grand Ronde, going to a school where mostly made up of her cousins and her sister. Yeah. And then last summer, I was able to go to Los Angeles and take pictures of what life is like today on 58th Place. So the pictures you see at the top, Charlene, the section of 58th Place, which is a very long street in South Los Angeles, has completely been torn down, her section of it. And now, as you see, there's this Sunny Market or super mall that is just ginormous. And then down from that are those houses that you see in the bottom left. And so this house in particular has like AstroTurf in the front yard. Some of them were completely cemented in. She talks in the book about how there's this little skinny sidewalk and little patches of grass. And then the bottom right is the elementary school today. So there's no more red brick building. It's actually this lower 1-story building on the left. And then to the right is a two-story building that the kids attend today. But Budlong Avenue Elementary is still there. And it's still, if you look at it on Google Maps, it's still a concrete playground.
And then you also did quite a bit of research with the Grand Ronde tribe. Can you talk about all of the considerations that you had to have, that you took in to make a relationship with this tribe, and why this was important?
Yes. And for this, I really, need to say Wado, thank you to Elise for, definitely being supportive of that, and talking to everyone else at Lee and Low, and you all paying for me to go out and have a few days to spend with the tribe. Because even though in my previous background, I studied federal Indian law and policy, and I've actually been to Grand Ronde, with my previous work, I hadn't been there in the context of writing a book about their culture, about their language, that incorporates all those things. And so this was a necessary visit, because I am not from that tribe, and I wanted to be, very sensitive to how they were portrayed. And so I went and met with folks from the cultural resources staff, who were fabulous. They gave me a tour and went over all the Chinook Wawa language that's used in the book. And you've got a wonderful glossary in there that they've gone over. They reviewed the book. But as I say, any errors in the book are mine and Charlene's alone, and not theirs. But just to sit down with the historic preservation officer and have them pull out, here's what the reservation looked like in 1957. This is what, this looked like in 1954, and this is where, the schoolhouse would have been, and where they lived in conjunction with that in Spirit Mountain. So as you're looking at these pictures today, if you look at the center picture, hidden behind the clouds, is Spirit Mountain. And then that kind of valley below, you can see white at the bottom of the trees. There's a house nestled back in there, but that used to be an area where a lot of people had houses. So Charlene would have been living in that area, as a child. And that's where a lot of folks prior to termination lived. Today, they have a plank house, which you'll hear mentioned in the story. That's in the upper left corner. And there's a small entrance that you go through in the front of the building, which you really can't see. And they have community gatherings there, different, celebrations that go on. The bottom corner is, they have an absolutely fabulous museum and wonderful cultural folks on staff there, and they're making a dugout canoe here. So I loved seeing that with all the shavings still in it. On the far right side is a tribute to veterans who served in various wars, and behind that is their tribal government complex. So their council, their chairman, and everyone's got offices in there. But Charlene served, and so she was a veteran. So I wanted to make sure I got a picture of that, because she was in the Navy. And anyway, it was a wonderful visit.
Can you point out the names on the statue? Umpqua, Rogue River, Shasta, Molalla, Kalapuya?
Yeah.
So the nations that are part of this nation, right?
Yes. So the Grand Ronde reservation it's called the Confederated Tribes, because there are 29 tribes that were relocated to this area. Several different bands of Umpqua and others. So that's what those 5 names refer to, are the kind of main groups, and then there are subgroups within those that were all relocated from different places around what we now know as Oregon to this reservation.
And that's an important part of the stories that the grandma tells in the book, that she shares the history of their tribe with the girls and tells about their own trail of tears. Elise, can you talk about a little about those grandmother stories and their importance in the story?
Yeah, I think something that is so part of, so part of Native culture is the idea of that passed down story, how important that is for us to hear and take in the knowledge of our ancestors and our elders And we really wanted to treat that with a particular kind of respect and kindness in the book. And we decided to kind of set those stories apart and give them the honor that we felt should be reflected in those stories. So as Cheech is talking about telling the girls, telling Regina and Pee-wee things about her own personal history, that's a moment, a story moment that's important. And so we made sure that it's in a different font. It has a thank you.
Yes. So if you look, you'll see whenever she's speaking, the font, like Elise says, is different. And there's that.
Yeah. And that's the symbol for water and rivers that from Grand Ronde, that from the Umpqua Nation that we added to that, kind of giving that a little extra.
A little detail.
Mm-hmm.
David there at Grand Ronde, who
you froze there for a moment.
Maybe it'll come back. Am I back?
You're back.
I wanted to give a shout out to David at Grand Ronde, who met with Traci and gave her amazing time. Really, this book was created by a group of people, all giving their voice and expertise. The Grand Ronde was a part of that. I was a part of that. Traci, part of that. I was part of that. Our Nations, and Charlene and her friends and her family. So many people came to make this book happen. Very thankful.
And I just want to point out that the artwork behind me is by Marlena Miles, who is also a Native woman herself from a different nation. Somebody fill in the gaps for me because I'm blanking on her nation.
She's Spirit Lake, Dakota, and Mohegan and Muscogee Creek.
Thank you. Beautiful art that has a lot of symbolism.
Right, from Grand Ronde.
I like this pointer. This works out.
In particular, the beaver, the sign, the tree, the mountains. Elise, you worked a lot on the art. You want to speak about that briefly?
Sure. I think something that Marlena was really wanting to do is to make sure that she, since she also is from another nation, I think all of us from different nations were feeling this high sense of responsibility to be as authentic as possible to Umpqua culture and to Grand Ronde. And so she talked with Traci a lot. We got a lot of art to her so that she could pull what was meaningful and put it onto the cover art. And so we actually have some symbolism in the tree there that's a symbol for fingers and spears. And the symbols in the mountains are 4 mountains. We have a plank house, and we have the beaver, which is the story which represents the story that Regina tells Cheech, her grandmother, near the end of the book, about a beaver who's kind of conned into leaving his home and is forever searching for it again. And then we wanted to make sure that we had this the separation between where she came from and where she was going. Traci and I talked a lot about that early on, about having this idea of her kind of being in the middle between these two worlds and that feeling. So she has you see Grand Ronde on the left-hand side there, and then on the right you see LA. So the pieces...
I'm bringing up the
yeah, it's like
people can actually see it because I don't think they
Sure.
actually see it. There we go.
Sure. So you have LA on the right there, and then you have Grand Ronde on the left, and you have Regina kind of glancing back towards Grand Ronde, and that was important even for her gaze to be in that direction. I thought that Marlena did an amazing job about putting this street sign, in this row where you have Grand Ronde and 58th Place. And of course,
Regina is at that intersection.
Yeah, because she's at that intersection in her life. And that car is actually based on the car that Charlene had, her parents had when she was a kid. And so it all has its significance, and was very thankful for Marlena to take such care in representing the Umpqua culture in the cover.
The book has won a number of awards, which we're really grateful for. Several starred reviews.
Yes.
You want to?
Yay.
Yep. Can you turn it just a little bit? That is the American Indian Library Association. There we go. Middle grade award, which we're just so grateful for. Can you share some of the other reactions that you've been getting? In particular, the one that we're most grateful for is actual young readers from a blog called Children of the Glades, who are Native themselves, their reaction. Can you share what you've heard from young readers?
Yeah, as you mentioned, of Glades are Seminole and Miccosukee youth in Florida who read the book and reviewed it, and kind of all the links for the reviews and things are on my website and certainly on the Lee and Low page for the book. But it's wonderful to get starred reviews, it's wonderful to have all these things. But when you hear from young readers that, again, like Elise and I, when we read it, I mean, we're not Umpqua, right? And these teens aren't either. And when they, read the book and said, this speaks to me, I feel, again, like I feel seen, I relate to this. That's when, like this book needed to be in the world.
I cried so much when I read that. when I read her blog entry, I just bawled because I was like, yay, that was the most important thing. I think she said something like, I see Regina as my friend, and I just like.
Yeah. And so many other Native, teachers and librarians who have just read the book, loved it, and said, wow, we need this. But for it to be recognized by the American Indian Library Association, which, is made up of Native librarians who are out working with our children on a daily basis, whether that's through tribal libraries or public libraries or school libraries, and for them to give it, their for it to win their middle school award was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And like I say, just shows the importance of the work that Charlene did to get this story out there, because she knew it's not talked about,
There's no other book like
people
this.
don't know. No, we're completely invisible in terms of this period of history. And this is a wonderful way for kids who, nowadays their grandparents or great-grandparents have gone through this and lived through this, and their legacy as a family, because they've been relocated, it's an entry point, for them to understand what's happened, what their, family members were experiencing at a younger age, and to talk about it. But also then for their peers to understand that this is what's happened to, other people in this country, and we can't just not know about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Naomi Bishop in the Q&A. What were responses from Grand Ronde youth about the book? Have you heard from Grand Ronde youth at all?
I haven't heard specifically from them, no. I know that from the people that worked with on the tribal level, who were of an age where their parents were the ones that were moved, or they were very young. Some of them were young when they were moved. It was really hard hitting for them, because it just brought up, kind of all of that dishevelment of having to pick up and move and be in this new place and being very unsettled. And hearing their stories while I was there, because some of them read while I was there and others afterwards, it told me that we were on the right track, with the book. And because again, I hadn't lived through this part, Charlene's not here to ask questions of. And so they really became, for me, that sounding board of, is this reflecting the reality? And I very quickly learned that it was.
And we should point out that the Grand Ronde Nation was restored in what, 1985, I believe. Is that correct?
83.
Mm-hmm. So a number of the tribes that went through this trauma have been restored, but several are still fighting to be restored, correct?
Mm-hmm. And the land that was lost, you know, not all of that, of course, has been returned. But one of the scenes, you know, that we talk about in the book about the cemetery was actually very integral in the tribe getting restored, because they maintained control over the cemetery the entire time. The federal government didn't take the cemetery. And when I was talking with some of the staff there, they said, you know, people continued to bring folks home and bury them, even though they had been moved to Seattle or San Francisco or Los Angeles, wherever. They continued to bring people home. And that was a very important part of their restoration, because they showed continuous connection to the land, and the fact that they had always maintained the cemetery, even though they weren't able to stay.
Exactly. Can either of you answer a question from one of our attendees about recommendations on how to find a sensitivity reader in a particular Native community, and perhaps speak about what we mean by creating relationships?
Yes, I would love to talk about that. I think something that people forget is that, and they don't mean to, I think it's just been just how our culture has set things up, but they forget that we're actually here. We're on phones, we have offices and emails, and you can call a nation, call their cultural department or their museum or someone, and ask who you can speak to and talk to. But I wouldn't expect to have just this immediate open arms, you know, from people. It takes time for them to know you and feel like you're also somebody that they want to spend some time with, to work on something. That relationship is really key.
We've lost you again.
Am I back?
Yeah.
I think that the relationship is key. Sorry, keep going.
That relationship is key, because we have 500 years of history of us learning not to trust people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that to say that, you know, again, I'm from another tribe, you know, and even when I went out to Grand Ronde, I didn't, you know, the email that I initially got from David Harrelson, the cultural resources manager, was like, look, you know, we're not signing off on anything, you know, I'm happy to meet with you. But I mean, he was very upfront about, like, you know, you're welcome to come out here, but like, we've been around this before. And because of, you know, the community I come from, and that everybody, you know, and the brother wants to be Cherokee or says that they're Cherokee, and there are always people who are appropriating our culture. Like, I very much got it. I wasn't put off by that at all, because I knew that when we visited, you know, I was going to be myself. I was going to be honest about, you know, here's the situation that we find ourselves in with the book. My co-author is no longer with us. She is a citizen of your nation, and I want to make sure that this is right. The publisher wants to make sure it's right. And, you know, I think a lot of people have this mindset of like, I want to write this book. I know this is really important. I got to get this done. And those may all be very valid things, but you have to first and foremost approach any of it with an attitude of humility. Because if nothing else, you will find, you know, humility is huge in Indian country. It really doesn't matter how many books you've published, you know, who you are. They are looking at who you are as a person, you know, and reading your heart. And you can tell them all day long you don't make much money as an author or whatever, but too many other people, like academics, don't make a ton of money either. But they've come in and they've taken our stories and they've used them for their own gain and distorted things. And so, as Elise was saying, there's a lot of mistrust. So you know, need to do the requisite work. And that is getting on the tribe's website, you know, finding out who the cultural staff are, but recognizing that they've all got jobs and that tasks and responsibilities and things that don't involve you. And so it may be some
it can take a long time, and
it can.
You should be prepared for that and put that work in.
Yeah, you're going to have to build a relationship, and if that's not what your doesn't work with your timeline or your interest or whatever, then definitely don't do it. You know, like don't go down that road, because it will turn out badly for everyone if you try to speed up a process. It just won't work.
We're running out of time, but I just want to quickly answer Leah's question. She's wondering if there are other books that deal with Umpqua or similar Native issues of losing tribal membership, etc. I don't know that there is any other middle grade book about termination. Do you?
No, there is not.
No, this is the first one that we know of.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. I've looked. I haven't seen. If there is one out there, panelists, or not panelists, but
I think that's why this book is so important, is because it's shedding light on an era of history in the United States that just has not had enough light shown on it.
Right. I mean, you can find things in like the educational market. You know, there are things that are more surveys of and in nonfiction that talk about this time period, but not in certainly not in a picture book, but not in middle grade. Right. That would be accessible to your elementary and upper elementary.
Naomi Bishop, who is a librarian and Native herself, says there are some Canadian publishers that have some books that would be good for, the questioner is asking about doing group reading and comp titles for that. She suggests Dreaming in Indian, which is more of a YA title, but might
right, yeah,
because
yes,
kind of multimedia kind of book.
That's a good one.
We have one last question. Before we get to that question, I want to be sure that we acknowledge Charlene's husband, Roger, who was so
Hey, Roger.
important in making sure that this book was able to come out. And we acknowledge her whole family and community up there in Vermont for their support of this book and making sure that Charlene's legacy was able. Roger sent you a whole box full of her notes, correct?
Yes, he sent a box of notes. She said, you know, Roger's going to send you a box. And so this box arrives and he's gotten newspaper clippings and photos. And so those photos that you see in the back of the book, those were, you know, sent along to me. There's a thumb drive with her, you know, various drafts on it. And so there's pictures of her that I had surrounding me as I was working on the revisions. And so I felt like, you know, she was with me as we were working on you know, polishing this up and adding where we needed to and taking out. And you know, Roger and I have had many, many conversations, and I know that he's just over the moon for, again, the reception that the book has received. And I told him that, you know, this absolutely couldn't have happened without him and her family, because I said, you know, as a writer myself, I know the time that it takes